It is my real great pleasure to ask to the floor Dr. Bogdan Iacob, who comes from Romania. And Dr. Bogdan Iacob is the Secretary of the Scientific Council, the Institute for Investigation of Communist Crimes and the Memory of Romanian Exile. He's a PhD in history and Historians and the Nation. That is the title of his doctoral thesis, and he covers the period of 1955 to 1966. So I think that your presentation, Mr. Iacob, will be very interesting in comparison to Dr. Schwader's presentation. Mr. Iacob studied in Freiburg, Switzerland, as well as in Leipzig, Germany. And the very title of the presentation is Socialist Integration and Alternative Geographies of Science, Romania and Soviet Bloc.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me for this wonderful event. Unfortunately, my presentation is not going to focus that much on historians because I'm focusing more on a general framework of science, politics in the Eastern Bloc, but I definitely enjoyed the earlier presentation, and it definitely comes very close to what I'm working on as well. So in his opening address, Dr. Racinskas mentioned that one of the most important aims of this international conference is to rebuke a misperception on the nature of communist power in Eastern Europe after the death of Stalin and after Khrushchev's secret speech, namely the taking for granted of the de-radicalization of communist systems in Eastern Europe. My presentation analyzes the way in which a turn toward asserting the organizational principle of national science in Romania, closely following the regime's autonomous line within the Soviet bloc, did in fact reinforce communist rule in the country, and it did not constitute into an alternative to the ideological monopoly of the party state. The indigenization of science politics in Romania as a complementary phenomenon to the nationalization of an unreformed, non-de-Stalinizing communist party strengthened the legitimacy of the regime. The emancipation of the Romanian communist leadership within the Soviet bloc was based on a redefinition of the party's position within political, cultural, and historical spaces. Ultimately, the self-assertiveness of the Romanian Workers' Party, the name of the Communist Party until 1965 in Romania, and of its polity relied on and developed alternative geographies both regionally and internationally at the world-scale level. Science, particularly historical studies, was positioned in areas consistent with the crystallizing identitarian narrative of the regime itself. One can identify at least three trajectories for this phenomenon. The first one, a self-proclaimed reintegration into Europe at the level of epistemic communication and exchange. The second one, the proposal of a regional project of research, Southeastern European studies with its corollaries, Balkan and Byzantine studies. And a third one, the rejection of Central Europe if identified with a historiographical reconsideration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And here obviously the explanation is the historiographical struggle between Romanians and Hungarians over the historical rights and natural rights of Romanians in Transylvania. Moreover, it all happened in the context of a Soviet-coordinated project of cultural scientific integration that complemented the principle of a unitary socialist planned economy within the CEMCON, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. And my paper from now on is going to focus on this last aspect of the phenomenon that I was discussing earlier. So after 1956, and here I'm thankful to my colleague Adrian Ciaflâncă because in my paper I'm not going to provide much political background in the dynamics of the Communist Party in Romania. So when you're listening to me, just try to also remember what he was saying because he provided a bit more background than I'll do in my presentation. So after 1956, the Romanian communist regime was growing its own legs on the path of individuality. In 1958, the retreat of the Soviet troops, then the disbandment of Sovroms, the crucial role in aiding the crushing of the Hungarian Revolution, which actually reinforced the leadership of Gheorghe Gheorghiu Dej, the General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party, and encouraged him not to pursue de-Stalinization. And then the Romanian involvement in the Sino-Soviet dispute, which obviously elevated the international status of Romanian communists in the world communist movement. And last but not least, the clampdown on representatives of the Hungarian minority in the late 50s, which led to policies of cultural Romanization. In this context, even what previously seemed a fortress of Soviet scientific and cultural influence came under revision, namely the Institute for Romanian Soviet Studies. One of the central projects of alternative geography of science, and maybe the most important one in the arithmetic of identity games pursued by the communist regime and the scientific front in Romania, was the reaction against socialist integration of ChemCon academies. The principles, lingo, and countries involved in the campaign for coordinated planning, unified production efforts, and international division of labor found a counterpart on the realm of culture and science. Under the circumstances, science not only became national in Romania, but could also claim to have struggled for emancipation, so to speak, in concert with party-state leadership stand against Soviet political hegemony. To put it differently, the Romanian Workers' Party's scuffle in the ChemCon for economic political autonomy was directly tied to a similar intra-bloc scramble for cultural scientific self-centeredness. In May 1964, scientists met to discuss and express their support for the April Declaration, the document that defined the new autonomy within the world communist movement of the Romanian communist regime, a regime that previously had blatantly rejected reform and de-radicalization. In his conclusions, the President of the Council of Ministers, so the equivalent of the Prime Minister, Ion Gheorghe Maurer, put together the two phenomena, socialist economic and cultural integration, raising the specter of a possible total loss of sovereignty, which then functioned as a rallying call for many years to come for Romanian scientists and particularly historians. And I quote here, "I don't want to jump to conclusions. On the one hand, economic integration. On the other hand, cultural integration. Of course, there are other fields besides economy and culture, where leadership is presupposed, but they are very limited. It is not about only economic integration as a reflex to some conditions that manifest themselves in socialism and which should be developed in, which manifest themselves in capitalism and which should be developed in socialism. Cultural integration is more than that. What necessity imposes this cultural integration? I'm not jumping to conclusions, I do not dare. I know what it means to make unfounded accusations, to bring groundless charge against someone. And obviously, he was referring here to the Soviet Communist Party. Under the circumstances, nobody can be surprised by the wholehearted association of the scientific front in Romania to the party's offensive for so-called independence. To exemplify it, at a meeting of the Bucharest University Party organization that included, at this particular meeting, only the departments of philology, history, law, and foreign languages, this meeting was summoned to vote a resolution of support for the April Declaration, the one that I mentioned earlier. It was reported that archaeologist Ioan Nestor, an individual that had been many a times on lists of academicians to be purged or reprimanded for their reactionary views, and between us, the translator of Mein Kampf during the interwar period, declared only the walls could not endorse such a document. In a notorious article entitled The Current Problems of the World Socialist Systems Development, published in Problems of Peace and Socialism in 1962, Nikita Khrushchev argued that, and I'm quoting, "Furthering a multicultural collaboration is one of the most important tasks of our present day." A year earlier, in 1961, there was a meeting in Moscow with the representatives of the academies in the Soviet Union, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Mongolia, Poland, and Romania. For the first time, the Soviet representatives put forth the topic of coordination of socialist countries' participation at international scientific events. The initiative was complemented by the proposal of the Polish Academy's representative to inquire into ways of coordinating scientific activity across the socialist camp. As a consequence, in 1962, the first convention of socialist academies was organized in Warsaw. It brought together representatives from the USSR, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Mongolia, Vietnam, Romania, and, of course, Poland. The main issues debated were the creation of permanent bodies, a secretariat and a bureau, that would deal with the coordination of multilateral scientific cooperation and the founding of international research institutes. It was also decided that yearly conventions of socialist academies would be convened. They were to be prepared by special meetings of the Academy's offices of foreign relations. In 1963, a second convention took place in Berlin. The main tenets of this meeting's programmatic documents were, and I quote, the creation of a single body for planning and coordinating scientific activity, the close coordination of the individual academies, long-term plans synchronized with the planning of commissions of scientific collaboration in the CameCon, end quote. The response of the Romanian side to these initiatives will be first formulated at the third such convention. The latter took place in Sofia in April 12 and 19th, 1964, so approximately a week before the publication of the Romanian Workers' Party April Declaration, the one that I mentioned earlier. The programmatic document here was entitled The Principles, Forms and Methods of Multilateral Scientific Collaboration among the Academies of the Socialist States. The authors were the academies from Poland and Czechoslovakia. The most important thesis put forth by this convention were, and I quote again, the common usage of the scientific and technical potential of socialist countries, the common use of laboratories and installations belonging to various academies, the creation of intra-block scientific collectives and institutes on the basis of existing national institutes that reach on their respective field of science a high methodological and theoretical level and have experienced workers and the necessary technology. Then, the specialization of certain countries in the field of science and technology, the specialization of academic journals on specific fields, along with the creation of international editorial boards and the publication of these reviews by the academy that has the best conditions available in the respective branch and from an economic point of view. The unitary coordination of the specialization of scientific cadres in research subjects. And last, the multilateral coordination of the international scientific events organized by the academies of the socialist state. End quote. The Romanian reaction was unambiguous and totally in accordance with the Romanian Workers' Party line regarding Khrushchev's plan for CameCon. The Romanian Academy's representatives rejected all proposals and requested that the above-mentioned document be removed from the agenda of the proceedings in Sofia. As a consequence, a person called Ilie Diculescu, who was the head of the Science and Arts section of the Department in Propaganda and Culture associated to the Central Committee, noted in a report that in 1964, that, and I quote again, the multilateral collaboration was not extended, being limited only to thematic collaboration on a small number of issues that had been chosen at the previous periodical meetings of the specialists in those respective fields. End quote. The Romanian point of view was driven home during the July 1965 meeting of the Academy's Foreign Affairs offices in Bucharest. This was a preparatory meeting for the fourth convention of the representatives of the Academies of the Socialist countries, which was obviously supposed to take place in Moscow in December. The agenda that was to be discussed both in Bucharest and in Moscow was a new version, though not significantly different, of the text that Romanians rejected in Sofia. Therefore, according to a report prepared for Ilie Diculescu, the man mentioned earlier, the representatives of the Romanian Academy, Office of Foreign Relations, were instructed both in Bucharest and in Moscow, and I quote, to have no initiative regarding the new proposals for multilateral collaboration, end quote. All other materials concerning further international scientific integration within the socialist camp were deemed, and I quote again, unacceptable for the Romanian Popular Republic Academy, and the Romanian Popular Academy proposed their exclusion from the agenda of the Moscow Convention, end quote. The Romanian representatives will disagree with any proposal for a supra-state form of organization in the field of relations among socialist states' academies. And quote again, they will accept no decision that would lead to our country being represented by other countries in international scientific organizations. The Romanian Academy will reject the project of creating international academic journals. End quote. The only alternative accepted by the Romanian Academy was that of sectorial collaboration between specific institutes on the basis of bilateral accords and other multilateral agreements focusing on specific research issues signed by a certain body, scientific body from a certain socialist country, or signed on respective fields of study by representatives of the academy of that CAMCOM country. So despite the rather ambitious outlook of this bilateral, trilateral types of arrangements, in reality the international collaboration plans of the Academy, the Romanian Academy, presuppose mainly scholarly exchanges and specialization residencies. Most of the foreign relations of the Romanian Academy at the time that I'm dealing with were centered on exporting domestic production and on advertising, and I quote here, the great accomplishments of Romanian science and culture along with those of the building of socialism in the country, end quote. In the end, the vital priority for the Romanian side in the project of multilateral international collaboration with the socialist camp remained that of continuously increasing and advocating the prestige of national science and its glorious traditions. By 1965, science was irreversibly tied to the principle of Romanian socialist sovereignty. Similarly to the macro-systemic evolution toward increased unity, self-centeredness, and autochthonousness generated by Romanian Workers' Party's reaction to the project of greater CAMCOM unity, the scientific field in the country too moved toward heightened centralization and planning. In conclusion, the combination between a discourse of independence in the international politics of science, the switch of focus to the West, the rekindling of traditions of regional cooperation, the opportunities of traveling abroad, and last but not least, reestablishing the Academy's role as pinnacle of national epistemic consecration, in contrast to a communist transnational cooperative framework, strengthen the relationship between scientists and the regime. To put it rather ironically, the Romanian academicians became the bearers of good news of national progress under communism, and the valiant defenders of Romania's prestige and honor in an inimical and competitive socialist bloc. The analysis of the shifting geography of Romania's science during the first half of the 1960s reveals that the Academy was fully integrated and doing its part in the communist regime's campaign for autonomy and reinvention of systemic identity. Thank you.
Thank you to our guest from Romania on social integration, alternative geographies of science, Romania and Soviet bloc in 1960-1965. This perhaps allows us to feel better the Lithuanian context. That is, that the means that were applied in Lithuania to control society and exploit its human and economic potential were not unique, they were employed on a larger scale as well.